I'm a director for Hays Specialist Recruitment. I cover the West and North Yorkshire area. And for any of you that don't know Hays, we're a specialist recruitment business. We've been in operation over 50 years, and we work on a local, national and global basis. I myself have worked with the business for 20 years, supporting customers across Yorkshire and the North West. Delighted to be joined by Sam Pawson today, who's partner for employer services at Chadwick Lawrence LLP. And between the two of us, we obviously will be presenting the guide, and Sam's going to talk a little bit through his experience and knowledge around flexible working, including working from home, and how we can maybe provide some ideas around how to make those teams as productive as possible. I do wish that we were all having a coffee, enjoying a pastry, and having a good catch up about the market, and really how quite challenging and opportunistic it is at the moment. But unfortunately, we're not available to do that. So it is unfortunate that we have cameras off and microphones off, but there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. The chat box function is just there. If anybody wants to pop a question in, please feel free to do so. And then we'll be in a situation where we can answer those questions at the end. All right. Okay. So it's our 8th year of doing the annual salary guide, and the data this year has been exceptional. So we've had over 23,000 responses from employers and professionals across the UK. And that's professionals from entry level right through to C-suite, from a variety of different sectors and different sizes of organisations, which is super to be able to see. And overridingly, the message is that there is a real boost in positivity and confidence in the market at the moment. Oh, I'm sorry, my slides have just moved. Apologies, guys. I'm really sorry, they've moved.
Sorry, Claire. For me, you're on the first page still on your slides that I can see.
Okay, I'm really sorry, guys. Let me just move that forward. Okay, so I think the point to make is that there is a real boost in positivity and confidence in the market at the moment. I think we've come back from COVID, and you know, businesses are trying to make the most of the opportunities that presents, or they've had freezes during the pandemic and they're trying to get back to where they were before, and it is really, really positive. I mean, the confidence that we've got is back to pre-pandemic levels, and it's great to see that so many businesses are feeling really positive about the future. I mean, we are slightly concerned about what winter may bring, and the pressure that might put on the NHS. We'll have to wait and see, but certainly government is keen that we learn to live with the virus, that we keep business open and we get the economy moving again. So let's hope that winter is as kind to us as it can be. So demand for talent has absolutely soared to an 8-year high. 80% of employers are planning to hire in the next year, and that's the highest level of suggested activity in the 8 years that we've been doing the survey, which I think is quite formidable, really. But skill shortages are reaching new heights. They absolutely are. And I think everybody that is hiring at the moment is finding the market particularly challenging, and particularly where there was always skill shortages, or there were problems anyway, particularly around technology, digital marketing, engineering, things like that. So employers who have experienced skill shortages in the last year, 86% of employers that responded to the survey said that, and it was the same percentage in Yorkshire and the North East, which I thought was fairly interesting. Okay. Now, that has probably been highlighted even more due to challenges around legislation, Brexit, for example. Oh, is it still showing the front page for me, and is this correct? I think there might be a slight problem with the slides. Just 1 second, everybody. Because somebody's saying they can't see it. I do thank you for popping that in the chat. Just bear with me 1 moment, everyone. Me too.
Right. Claire, which slide are you on?
It is letting me, Claire, just click through them as you're speaking on the bottom.
Right.
Don't worry, I'm here.
Sorry, Claire. I'm trying to think if it's the easiest now. If I
No, I'm all right. Could you stop sharing? I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm all right. Please.
Claire, what slide are you on?
No. Could you stop sharing? I'm just going to reload it because then I'm in control of them. I think that's part of the problem. Sorry, Sam.
Don't worry.
I think what's happened is I think it's changed the mode. And then let's just see what happens when I do this. I'm really sorry, guys. Masses of apologies, but if there's no, people can't see the slides.
Claire, now we can see the first page. It's when you
That's
click.
fabulous. Right, here we go. Right, so let's go
Perfect.
back. That's fine. So I think we got back to here really, which was that the demand for talent has soared. Okay, so if I start here, can everybody see that? And I'm, you know, any problems, please pop another message in the chat. I do apologise. I don't know what's happened. Okay. So I was saying that there's a real high demand for talent being driven. Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you. This high demand for talent is being driven by a combination of organisations hiring following a freeze during the pandemic and those taking advantage of the recovery and the opportunity to grow. But skill shortages are skyrocketing and employers are encountering lots of challenges in finding and securing the talent that they need. 86% of employers across both the UK and Yorkshire and the North East have said that they've had skills shortages in the last year. And that's an increase from 77% who were saying the same thing last year. So challenges accessing vital skills are being driven in part by legislative changes, including Brexit and reforms to IR35. Around a third of employers believe Brexit has decreased their ability to hire the right people. And I must admit, and I've spoken to some customers where there's been a reliance on migrant workers, they've obviously been significantly affected. The main way employers plan to overcome this kind of decrease in access to talent due to Brexit was probably to hire temps or contract workers. However, there's still challenges in that space too, due to the IR35 legislation that was enforced on the private sector in April this year. The changes have affected certain organisations who engage with PSC interim workers, and just over half of employers who do engage with those workers since April 2021 say it's been harder to hire due to those reforms. Our survey findings also reveal that despite greater positivity and confidence, there's a real lack of employee movement, and that's serving to worsen the skills shortages that are being reported. So skill shortages are having the greatest impact on productivity, according to employers, a clear warning sign. But there's also been a jump in the negative impact skill shortages are having on employee morale, absenteeism, and unfortunately stress. So the combination, sorry, I'll just have a little drink. The combination of this post-COVID recovery that's been quicker than expected, skill shortages and a peak in hiring, so we're seeing salaries starting to rise. So we're seeing wage inflation in many areas as a result of the skills gap. And overall salaries have had an average increase of 2.8% across the UK. You can see here some of the highest average increases have been in shared services, tech, engineering, HR, life sciences and construction and property roles. But interestingly, in terms of the regional salary increases, the highest rises have been in Northern Ireland, London and the South West. Yorkshire and the Humber, the salaries have risen by an average of 2.6 and in the North East by 2.1%. However, this isn't the whole story. Double-digit salary growth has been particularly evident in many of the specialist technical areas, so niche roles within technology, engineering, digital marketing are commanding some of the highest. And for businesses with oodles of cash, maybe there is less of a concern, but for smaller startup businesses, They just can't compete, and it doesn't feel like a fair playing field. I've seen some operational managers make some quite reactive decisions when dealing with resignations and offers, which have left all parties disappointing. I think it remains to be seen how long this wage pressure can be sustained for, but employers must certainly be thinking about other ways they can find to attract talent without relying solely on salary, and what the skills they need might genuinely be worth. With all that in mind, what steps can employers take to address some of these hiring challenges in the year ahead? So first of all, upskilling and reskilling is key. I mean, soft skills including communication, the ability to adopt change and flexibility, adaptability have all become more important to employers over the last year. In fact, I'd actually suggest they've been essential for everyone. Offering the chance to upskill and reskill can also help with talent retention, as just over a third of employers say they would prefer more support and training as a result of COVID-19, but only a quarter of employers are offering it. I think in my experience as a recruiter, and if I asked my teams, they would say a hiring manager would generally choose to recruit an experienced pair of hands who can hit the ground running. However, what we're seeing is that as candidate availability tightens, roles are often being left unfilled, where organisations and hiring managers are struggling to be flexible around requirements. And to address these shortages, over half of employers across the UK, 57% actually, say they plan to hire individuals who don't possess all the required skills, with the intention of upskilling them instead. As a means of overcoming that candidate shortage. And we've seen a real success where organisations are thinking innovatively about how they might do that. We've had organisations targeting retail workers from successful tech brands and taking those people into dev roles where the organisation is offering full training and support. I've seen many organisations offering apprenticeships across all sectors, from engineering to HR and even corporate services, with fast track development, career investment and reward built around retention methods. At Hays ourselves, we've been using recruitment style methodology internally to identify the skills and those with potential for development opportunities, rather than looking purely externally to fill skill gaps that we need. I'm sure managers here on the call, we look at our own teams all the time. My own team, the engine that makes my business flourish, and I see huge potential in people that work for me. And maybe by spending more time with them, asking them more questions, they help me not only identify innovative ideas that make my service better, but they focus my mind on who the future leaders of tomorrow may be. Somebody external on a session I was listening to said that upskilling requires mindfulness, and she wasn't talking about the yoga and meditation sense, but mindfulness as in self-awareness. And it really resonated with me that I can only perform well if I understand my strengths and seek to upskill myself where I have development areas. And I think the same can be said of a team, a department and a whole business. Interestingly, these ideas that I'm suggesting here don't require inflated salaries, but link to positive people strategies, good engagement, retention and reward based on business growth and productivity. I do understand there's a risk in hiring those without a track record, but perhaps a balance of developing talent and some specific hires to ensure skill gaps are covered creates a workable balance in what could be a difficult market at the moment. So hybrid, flexible working, the new world of work. As a result of COVID-19 and the shift to remote working, full-time for many, hybrid working is now a hot topic for many organisations, including our own. In Yorkshire and the North East, 43% of employers say they're now offering hybrid working, and then 29% say that it's under review. In terms of their approach to hybrid working, around a third of employers are actually offering their own staff choose how they work from home and how they work from the office. And 65% of employees say they'd be tempted to change a job if an organisation offered this flexibility, making it a really credible attraction tool if your organisation is available to offer it. On the flip side, if you operate in an industry where your competitors are offering hybrid working and you're not, you could risk losing staff. Of those professionals saying they're considering a career change in the next 12 months, 47% plan to find a role which offers a greater mix of hybrid working. It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, some businesses just can't operate without being physically present. You can't build a home without having boots on the ground. And for those offering flexible or hybrid working prior to the pandemic, I think this new world is business as usual for them. I think many, including Hays, March 2020 was an incredibly challenging space, and we had no policy for home working at all at that time. We weren't technically ready. And I'll be very honest and say, I think the pandemic forced an agenda the board had, rightly or wrongly, been quite reluctant to bring to the table. And within 3 months, 3 months of very difficult trading conditions, as you can imagine, well, hybrid working or working from home was working. In fact, I'd say it was working well. But to ensure the policy was right long term, we went through a robust piece of work to make sure we had the right structures in place, internal benchmarks to prove that it works successfully. And feedback suggests that it's here 100% to stay. Our attraction's easier, our retention's easier, our engagement scores have improved. And importantly, actually, for me, I feel it's reaffirmed trust between management and staff, and I feel it's really inspired some proactive plans and positive plans for when we're together in the office. I think our team days in the office are more meaningful, more collaborative, more memorable than ever before. The last factor I'd like to touch upon is the importance of an organisation's purpose and wellbeing policies when it comes to staff attraction and retention. 86% of employees across the UK say that an organisation's purpose is important to them when considering a new role. And we define that as a meaningful reason to exist, a higher objective than making money alone. And by playing a role in defeating societal, economical or environmental challenges in the communities in which businesses are based. So 86% is incredibly high. So clearly an important factor for organisations to promote prospective talent through multi-channel attraction methods and the interaction that they have with individuals in an organisation during a recruitment process. Employee wellbeing has also come to the fore during the COVID-19 pandemic, and over a third of employees say they want more wellbeing support as a result. However, only 25% of organisations have offered it. And interestingly, one thing that came up was an additional days off or time off for wellbeing is also the third highest benefit that employees value when considering a new role. Important factor for organisations to focus on, maybe. So recommendations in summary, it's a tough hiring market out there. Skill shortages have become really prevalent. Hiring plans are at 8-year high, and the number of people planning to change jobs is at an all-time low. But what's also evident is that there is a lingering ambiguity in the marketplace. How long will the wage inflation last? Will the recovery continue at this pace? And hiring plans need to flex to the market, and we're probably going to have to adapt as quickly as we've had to over the last 18 months. So with that in mind, I'll close with a couple of recommendations for you for the talent strategies for the year ahead. Make training part of your everyday. Put simply, if you don't invest in training and promote it to your prospective employees, you'll miss out on talent, and lifelong learning needs to be embedded within the DNA of an organisation to encourage retention. Put purpose front and centre. Job seekers want to understand what you're all about. And if you're in the private sector, that means less emphasis on your profit and more on your purpose. Your reason for being as an organisation needs to be clear, and anyone involved in the hiring process needs to feel equipped to answer questions about how you help the communities you serve. Show you care. Employers need to demonstrate their care, and this really resonates with me. I think COVID-19 has been tough. Employee morale has dropped, and don't be fooled into thinking that wellbeing is going to disappear. It's here to stay, and employees want to know that you care about their mental health and wellbeing. I think we're asking a lot of people in today's world of work. The pace of change is rapid, and the best employers are those who help their employees get on board with all the changes that are afoot. Refresh your ways of working. For organisations who choose not to continue to invest in office space due to new ways of working, that's great, but it's vital that we put the structures in place to maintain company culture. Communication has always been key. How we clearly state an overall objective of an organisation becomes paramount, and I think wherever possible, in-person meetings should continue. Okay. Adapt your workspace for hybrid. For many, the future will be hybrid work, and the office will remain an important part of the mix, but we need to upgrade tech, make sure the workspace supports flexible working, and employees are still going to need areas where they can work together and work apart. And I think by showing how you've adapted that workspace tells a job seeker that you're on top of those changes, and you're going to provide everything they need to be able to do their job to the best of their ability. Finally, don't panic about pay. Pay remains the main motivator for employees to consider when changing roles, and candidates are being offered multiple offers at the moment, making it more important that you're competitive. However, consider how long wage inflation will last, what increases are possible, and what roles you're prepared to pay more for. If you can't increase your budget for some roles, what else can you flex? Is the overall package good enough to attract candidates? Can you offer more? It's not just about pay, flexibility. Could you hire somebody junior and provide some training and do things differently? Consider what options will work best to ensure you can access the talent that you need today. Before I hand over to Sam, I'd like to let you all know that our 2022 digital guide is now available for you to have full access to, and my colleague will be sending a link and a QR code through at lunchtime. You'll then be able to explore the full survey in more detail. You'll also be able to view expert insights from over 20 institutions and salary information for thousands of roles, hopefully guiding your reward strategy for the year ahead. Please don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got any questions regarding the functionality of the site, or if I can be of any assistance further. So that concludes my presentation today. I hope you found the session useful. I do apologise about the slides at the beginning. I don't know quite what happened there with PowerPoint Live. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box for after Sam's presentation. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Sam Pawson of Chadwick Lawrence, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Claire. So yeah, just to kind of pass on, again, we'll try and do a seamless technical handover, and I also am going to try a PowerPoint Live, so bear with me while I'm just popping that on here. Obviously, I think a few people have just joined us, so anyone who has just joined us, could you just pop your video off and pop yourself on to mute? Right, we will. I'm gonna ask for some thumbs up. Let's test it. So because of the issues Claire's had, so can I have a thumbs up from people if we can see it moving from 1 to 2 there? There we go. Perfect. So that seems to be working well. So as I say, just a bit of the formal introductions out the way. Obviously, just to introduce myself, follow on from Claire. It's for those who don't know me, Sam Pawson. I'm a partner in the employment team at Chadwick Lawrence. We have a long history with Hays doing events. Again, I think personally I've been doing these 6 or 7 years now, so a long time. We always present the salary guide together, and as Claire says, it would have been fantastic to do that in person. Over a sandwich and a coffee, but we will obviously persevere with what we've got. What I'm talking about today, and the plan for me today, is to keep you for about 20 minutes or so, and to give some time for questions, as Claire mentioned. I'm going to focus on hybrid working, and the reason for doing that, obviously Claire and I spoke before, and we looked at the findings out of the salary guide, and as you've seen, and this idea of hybrid working and flexibility comes to the forefront, both in terms of a recruitment piece and what people are looking for, and that idea of flexibility, but also in terms of retaining staff as well. So what I was going to focus on, and really the theme of for those who've sat in a number of my webinars over the last 18 months, I am now slowly trying to push past COVID. And I'm sure a number of you have been to events where we've talked about flexibility and working from home and how we approach that during the pandemic. What I wanted to focus on today really was the future, and really to look at hybrid working as now a fixture in your organisations. As Claire rightly said, this unfortunately can't be for everyone. In certain industries, it is not possible. But from the numbers we've looked at, and numbers I'll point to as well, obviously there is a clear desire from candidates and from employees for this, but also that's reflected by organisations and what they're offering. What I want to touch on and just make a distinction today is the difference really between hybrid working and offering flexibility and really working from home. So we're going to focus initially on hybrid working and the advantages of that, and the softer side of the HR picture of that, and the advantages, some disadvantages, and perhaps how you cope with them as an organisation. What I wanted to then finish on was more of the legal side and earning my bucks as a qualified solicitor, and really talk about policy, contracts, and how this really will work in the future. Because Claire's focused on obviously what they've done in Hays, and Hays have taken this on and looked at this to a high degree, and it is becoming ingrained in their organisations. I think it'd be fair to say some organisations I act for and am aware of are probably not that far ahead. And what I wanted to focus on today is really that the time is probably now to look at this. So for those who have these types of policies, obviously I'm going to suggest what we're looking at and what we're doing both at Chadwick Lawrence and with my clients for you to compare to your own systems. And for those who have not got there yet, to make some suggestions how we're dealing with this and moving forward in the workforce. So that's me today. So just to kind of set the picture, and this a lot of this is what Claire has mentioned already. So just to look at some numbers here, and the data which kind of reflected the Hays survey as well, that 85% of workers would like to have some sort of hybrid working. Obviously, the lockdown is finished and the work from home requirement is finished. So this is moving forward, but there is still this overwhelming desire from quite a high number of workers to have some sort of options. So that then leads us to, well, what actually is hybrid working, and what are your options in terms of hybrid working, because it can be very different for each organisation. So theoretically, a form of hybrid working would be 100% remote working. You are now seeing positions that have moved 100% remote, and that again needs to be dealt with as a form of hybrid working. In my experience, I would say the majority now, however, is in between that, and there are options to offer a fixed or a flexible amount of remote and office working. So that's either a number of agreed days at home or fixed days at home being offered. Again, within organisations, we are seeing differences within the organisation. Some departments, it isn't, there's not an ability to work from home. So we're seeing hybrid working options in different departments and are being applied differently. And we'll come to later the policy and the legals that sit behind that and the importance of addressing that. As we say, some roles or some positions maybe not applicable for hybrid working, or perhaps when within someone's journey of seniority, it's not initially applicable, but it may become, and we'll again talk about options. But for that to be done, again, to reflect those type of numbers and what the requirements are. 64% of workers that we are finding prefer the option of mixed home and office. 37% of workers would like to work home on a full-time basis. I haven't got the numbers, but I would think it wouldn't be surprising that I think the same amount of employers would like that 37% working from home fully. But they're the numbers behind it. And as Claire says, if you're not offering this and you're able to do so, are you falling behind your competitors and other organisations who are offering that flexibility? So to kind of look at some of those and the advantages to organisations of hybrid working, as Claire's focused on, and I won't stick on recruitment for too long, but again, it does offer you wider recruitment options that can be obviously both in terms of what people do, but obviously geographically. Using Chadwick Lawrence as an example, we have seen new starters come from further out of our normal geographical remit, because if they only need to make that commute once or twice a day, that is palatable, while as if it's a 5-day commute, that is not so much. So you widen the pool a lot in terms of your options by offering some form of hybrid working. Again, a boost in productivity. We're often finding, obviously, people who are allowed that mix, all the well-being that Claire mentions, but also we're less time lost, the commute time. People are obviously working, they can switch on, they're available to work. That lost time for meetings, speaking personally, the amount of time I used to spend going between our 10 offices to meetings, that there's that loss in productivity. So being able to offer forms of hybrid working that allow that often boost productivity. From a legal standpoint, it allows you to deal with issues arising from disability and potential disability discrimination claims. It allows reasonable adjustments to be carried out much more effectively than when you need to accommodate people full-time in the office. So again, there's an advantage there. Reduction in overheads. Again, Claire's talked about the office space and how that's changed. A number of organisations both looking at their own property portfolios, but equally how you're using your office, and there's a reduction there in the space that needs to be used if you have a more flexible workforce who are sharing desks coming in and out. So there is a definite reduction in overheads that lots of businesses saw throughout the pandemic, and obviously I've wanted to continue that going forward. Again, finally, reduction in sick pay. Again, I think the stats, according to the HSC, that obviously stress, depression, anxiety account for 51% of all work-related sickness, and 55% of all sick days in 2019 to 20. It's statistically shown that obviously people working from home generally suffer from those conditions to a reduced degree. So you're seeing an overall reduction in sick days as a result of some form of hybrid working. So if we're looking those as the advantages, to look at perhaps the other side, but really not so much to look at it with a negative point of view, but really to look at perhaps ways to manage what people argue the disadvantages of hybrid working. So the ones we're often seeing is obviously a communication piece. I can't communicate with my staff as well because they are working remotely, and there is, undoubtedly, Claire's mentioned, still a requirement to see people meet in teams. Obviously, from a personal standpoint, where you are training staff, there is a high degree of osmosis where people learn through observing, learn through doing, and that is undoubtedly harder to do if people are based at home. So what can you do to look at that? Obviously look at the communication. So that's both maximizing your communication when you are in the office, but also, as we're doing today, using technology, using Zooms, using face-to-face meetings when impossible, and trying to set routines within that hybrid working platform, that you are maximizing your time when you are together, to ensure that the communication piece is done properly. Second issue, obviously, we've seen, and I think the real urban myth that was busted without the pandemic is this idea that somehow that people work at home, as I say, are less productive, or are slacking off. what we've seen in personal experience, I'm sure Claire will agree, is actually the danger with home working that we're finding is burnout and people working too hard, and a difficulty in the blurring the lines between the work and home, and we're often seeing issues of people at home working incredibly late into the day, and obviously sometimes that is through childcare or other flexibilities, but really to keep an eye out on potential burnout for people working in a hybrid format. So there are things you can do on a technological standpoint, such as obviously you can remotely turn off email access, or you can put processes in place that stop that, or to cut people off from a system and to really limit their time to avoid a burnout issue. So look again to technology. What are there things to do to do that? Again, team building linked to communication. The importance of still doing that in a hybrid format and maximizing the use of our time. Again, progression, I think, is something that that really is important, especially off the back of what Claire's talking about. Again, historically, the statistics and a number of cases that you'll see coming out of the Employment Tribunal I'll touch on, that often people historically who have been working flexibly or in a hybrid fashion have been overlooked for progression, out of sight, out of mind. And the importance as an organisation to understand that and to reflect on your patterns for staff retention and your internal progression schemes that obviously address that, to make sure that people who are not in the office full time are not being treated exactly the same as people who are. So again, something really to make sure forms part of your progression with members of staff. So to move on, in terms of moving on from the advantages and the background to that, so really look, as I said, to the legal side and the implementation of hybrid working, and I've asked the question at the start of that slide, why now? And why now is for a few reasons, some of which we've touched on, linked to obviously COVID and the instructions from working from home to end, but also obviously all the piece that Claire has talked about and the importance of doing this, and the question if you're not doing this, are you at a competitive disadvantage? The other important reason I want to touch on in terms of why now is this next point, to deal with actually what is hybrid working in someone's contract of employment, and what is hybrid working to a company as a policy. What we've dealt with over the last 18 months is, as Claire says, this March date, which was really a watershed moment where organisations have had to, within a few days, transform themselves. What that resulted in is, quite understandably, is things being done, on a quick pace because they had to be done. So lots of the processes that were put in place for working from home and forms of hybrid working were done informally. They were done as this needs to happen now. They weren't done with process. They weren't done with contractual change and variation to people's contracts to make them home workers. They were done to essentially abide with a statutory requirement to work from home. What that is now meant is people have had work patterns for some considerable time that have often been dealt with informally and agreed informally. The concern that creates, and why this needs to probably now be looked at informally, is for the point of lockdowns and while we had a work from home instruction. The advice from people like me is that didn't amount to a permanent variation of someone's contract. So just because they'd been working at home, that does not mean their contract has amended, because, as I said, it was a statutory instruction. The concern comes is if you don't look at this formally and just allow an informal agreement to continue, you are potentially giving someone an implied right that their contract is by implicitly amended to mean that their working pattern is now their contractual working pattern. So if they work a fixed period at home, that becomes their working hours. And the concern, therefore, is if you want to change that, you are needing to go through a variation of contract exercise to look at that. So why we need to address it now is because the longer that we leave it from a date that a statutory instruction is left, the harder it is for us to make an argument, well, this was just connected to COVID. So really to look at acting now, otherwise you may be implicitly agreeing to this anyway. What we're there looking for is, do you have as an individual a contractual right to hybrid working? The answer is no. What you have legally is a statutory right to make a flexible working request. And that is a very different thing to hybrid working. So again, I'm not talking today about flexible working requests in too much detail, because it is a statutory process. So I just had a message brought with me that was very old-fashioned, which I'll come on to. So in terms of a distinction there between flexible working requests and hybrid working, you have a right to make a flexible working request, and part of that flexible working request often does deal with working from home, hours, and that is a different regime than an organisation adopting what would be a non-contractual procedure on working from home. So we need to distinguish between the two. The final distinction also needs to be with people who are hired and recruited based on an agreement to work from a hybrid platform, because that again would be a contractual right. What we're dealing with really here and moving on is existing members of staff who may have had a hybrid model informally, and how we implement that going forward in an organisation. What the message just said to me is, and what I'm now going to talk through is hybrid working policies. And as Claire's kindly offered you a freebie today, I'm going to do the same thing. A number of your organisations may have a hybrid working policy. What I'm happy to offer you today, for obviously attendance today, is a free template policy. The note actually just said that there's a slight typo on the slides. So if you're interested in obviously getting a policy, the two email addresses there. My email is correct. The one that is a slight typo, and it's actually employmenthub@chadlaw.co.uk. So I'll confirm that at the end, but my email is absolutely correct. So in terms of dealing with the policies quickly. So hybrid working, as we say, generally would be introduced as a non-contractual policy, which means legally you have an opportunity to amend it as you desire, and it's a policy that doesn't form part of someone's contract. Questions: is it available to all staff? And the key one really, what should it contain? So again, just to go through the key points of what I would suggest needs to be in your hybrid working policies. So again, who does this policy apply to? Lots of organisations have different types of workers that they might want it to apply to. Some organisations, for example, I deal with, make a distinction between employees in a probationary period and those who've passed it. So again, that policy needs to address front and centre, who does this apply to and at what time does it apply to them? Again, if you're then looking at your model, hybrid working, are you asking for a minimum percentage of time in the office? Are you establishing opportunities for days? So what is your policy and what are the requirements of that. The most common we are seeing is reference to percentage of time in the office, and then allowing flexibility within that. So 40% of the time in the office, 60% of the time in the office, and then a greater degree of flexibility. Again, are you going to offer this as a trial period, 6 months, 3 months, longer, to see how it goes? Absolutely an option, can be detailed within the policy. Conditions, again, that applies to in an organization. As I say, there's lots of individuals it might not apply to, but there also may be individuals who are, for example, in receipt of a disciplinary warning, a performance management issue, someone who has had a negative appraisal, that you may want to put conditions in your policy that says, while you are in receipt of this, the hybrid working policy will not apply to you. So any conditions that apply to your workforce, they need to be in. Again, importantly, as well as obviously dealing with working from home, we need to deal with the management of workplace attendance. So where you're dealing with individuals who are not working full time, how do we manage the time when they're in? So that's workspaces, hot desking. How's that implemented? How are we dealing with that? There's been historic people who get very attached to desks and stationaries, and that, again, how do we address that moving forward? Health and safety, again, should be reflected within a hybrid working policy. For people obviously working from home, as an employer, we still have a duty to offer those individuals health and safety, even when they are working from home. So that's workstation assessments, that's to deal with safety for those individuals. So we need to work with them within a policy to get them to adhere to standards, and also to inform us. Again, similarly, equipment, as organisations, you do have a duty to provide equipment for individuals working from home. So again, policy needs to detail how that's done, how that is managed, how equipment is dealt with both in the office and out of the office. So always mentioned within the policy. Data protection, again, while people are working at home, we need to ensure that our processes to apply GDPR, data protection, cybercrime, apply to individuals at home and their personal devices just as much as they would do at work. Again, finally, we should always have obviously a termination provision within the policy to end and to give an ability to end any form of hybrid working. So they're the key messages within the policy. As I say, anyone who would like a copy of ours, absolutely delighted to provide one. So pop an email to me, and I'll arrange for one to be sent over, and happy to do so. So finally, before we hand over for any questions, I hand over to Claire. I wouldn't be doing my job as a solicitor without doing some case law and some shock you and scare you at the end. So some of the kind of legal concerns going forward, and we've actually seen some cases already linked to this, which is again interesting and potentially alarming to some organisations. And this really is when you get hybrid working wrong, or your policy discriminates against someone and how you're applying that. So the main concerns with hybrid working generally relate to infringements of the Equality Act. Without doing a technical disability discrimination session, what we are mainly finding is examples of what we call indirect discrimination. So you can have cases of direct discrimination or harassment, but generally what we're dealing with hybrid working is indirect discrimination, to deal with what technically we call a PCP, a provision, criterion, or practice. So when we have a hybrid working policy, that obviously is a provision, criterion, or practice of that organisation. So what you are seeing in terms of claims is people who are saying, I've been indirectly discriminated because of, again, generally disabilities, but also can be, again, grounds of sex due to childcare is the main one. And I've been indirectly discriminated against because of the application of that policy. And just to kind of talk you through, just to end, two cases that have come out, and they have had some media recognition over the last few years. So first case follows a Nationwide Building Society 2020 case. Employee was on a home worker contract, present in the office 2 to 3 days per week, as she was the carer for her disabled mother. The employee was dismissed by reason of redundancy, as was another home working employee, despite a sufficient number of office-based volunteers coming forward to accept redundancy. Claims were subsequently brought for unfair dismissal, direct and indirect associative disability discrimination, and indirect sex discrimination. The tribunal concluded that the reason for the less favourable treatment was based on her status as a home worker, taking into account that the other dismissed employees who were not disabled. Therefore, direct associative discrimination claim failed. The claim of indirect discrimination was considered as the employee's role was no longer permitted to work at home full time, as this put carers at a disadvantage compared to non-carers. The employer had not considered alternatives or provided evidence as to how the decision was based, and they were fully aware of the employer's carer's responsibilities for her disabled mother. The employee failed to argue that the decision was a legitimate aim, as the tribunal held that a need for on-site supervision in itself contained a discriminatory element. And even if a legitimate aim was established, the tribunal was not satisfied with a real need, but only a subjective view that the new arrangement would be better. The employee's claim for indirect associative discrimination was therefore upheld. So exactly what we're talking about in terms of an application of a policy. So just because you have a policy, we need to look beyond that for the individuals. Similarly, a last claim, and then I'll move on. This is a claim of Thompson versus Scancrow Limited, trading as Manners. The employee was a sales manager earning £120,000 per annum, who announced her pregnancy in 2018. Returning to work on 2019 after maternity leave, the employee made an unsuccessful flexible working request to reduce her working pattern from 5 days a week, finishing at 6 p.m, to 4 days a week, finishing at 5 p.m, in order to collect her daughter from nursery. The employee raised a grievance and eventually resigned. The Employment Tribunal found the employee had put her at a disadvantage and found that she had been discriminated against by the denial of her request. The employee's claim for indirect sex discrimination was therefore upheld, and she was awarded £185,000. So again, not to leave you on a shock, but these are the kind of values that you can talk about if you're getting wrong. Again, technically speaking, I'm dealing there with a obviously a flexible working request rather than a hybrid working policy. But the importance it shows is that we need to both have a policy, but also make that policy that we have in itself flexible enough to deal with scenarios outside the norm, especially when you're dealing with people either with disabilities or, as I say, with caring needs, or often with childcare arrangements. So just because you have a policy, you need to look at adjustments to that. So that, again, to finish on that point is me today. We've talked about GDPR. So yeah, just I've noticed, Claire, have we had many questions? We had a lot of comments I've seen, but that's me finished. So Claire, I don't know, do you want to see if anyone has any questions?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's more, there's a confirmation that people could see at the beginning
Yes.
with my slides when that changed. And then there's been some commentary from Darren about agreement with you about productivity, because obviously we don't lose time commuting between offices. That's very relevant for me because I cover 5 offices. So I agree with what you said, Sam. You know, when you've got to travel across the whole region to get to different meetings, now when we think about actually how much time we wasted, it is more productive when we get the opportunity to use technology and work hybridly. And Is there any other questions? Is there anything anybody would like to ask us? Either about the recruiting and trends guide, about challenges in the market in terms of talent shortages at the moment, or with regards to flexible or hybrid working?
Yes.
Please pop a message in the chat box, or
Yeah.
here we go.
Here we go. So
Helen, I think this one could be you.
yes.
So, for a formal request to change to be a permanent home worker, would any reason why cannot do full-time at home when already demonstrated you can do it during the lockdown? Does that set a precedent that it can work?
It can do, but equally it doesn't have to. And the deal, the key with flexible working requests is both the process that you follow. It's a statutory right. So if you're dealing with a request, you have to deal with this as with a statutory flexible working policies, which generally means you have a meeting with that individual, and if you want to reject that request, it has to be, you have to rely on one of 8 statutory reasons for doing so. So the key with these is the justification for doing so. And where that case fell down, I won't get into the detail too much, is that the request needs to be objectively justified. So historically, a lot of people said, well, as long as I can show some reason, that's fine. So I think, Helen, where your point is a good one. Well, through lockdown, it's shown that it can be done. So we, as an organisation, if we're not wanting to adopt that, we will have to give good reasons why it can't, and those reasons need to be objectively justified rather than a preference. So that the justification in these cases is the absolute key, and to be able to justify it rather than it's our preference that would happen.
Okay. Another one for you as well, Sam, from a lady called Helen Clegg. Thanks, Helen. We've introduced a hybrid policy. However, to work from home, to provide your own equipment, should the employer provide the equipment that's required to work from home?
Not necessarily. You obviously, it really depends sector to sector, organisations, and what has been agreed. You as an organisation, and I'm not a health and safety expert, but do obviously have a number of requirements for that individual to allow them to work from home safely. So this is where your seating assessments, your desk assessments, and to have equipment to be provided. So it's not a absolute mandate, but you need to be able to allow that, and to be able to do it safely at home.
And working from home as well, Sam, this is another question that's coming in. I think it might be with the cost of everything going up at the moment, but if you're working from home, should an organisation be providing allowances for utilities, the internet, telephone?
Yeah, the answer is again yes. This came out of the pandemic, and you do. I cannot say off the top of my head what that exact allowance is, but there do needs to be use. Obviously, people at home, using the internet costs much more electricity. So yes is the short answer, but I can't tell you off the top of my head exactly what it is. Joanne, we can obviously I can email directly to confirm that. I'll consult with my colleagues.
Okay, fine. Okay. Any other questions? That was a thank you from Joanne. Thank you. Any other questions at all?
If not, Claire, so we'll allow people to do, but I'll finish off for me, and just in terms of a quick thank yous for my part, and I'm sure Claire will do the same. So just a big thank you on my side to my colleagues, Kira Scanlon and Phoebe Gerger. See, Phoebe's helped me set up the day and the slides today, and Kira's helped Claire and I with admitting you all and keeping us up and running. Main thank you for me was obviously to Claire. I think it's been an absolutely fantastic event. I really found Claire's piece interesting, both from a Chadwick Lawrence standpoint, and obviously to link into my presentation. We've got a number of events again coming up. We, as I said at the start, partner with Hays all the time with these, and I think I'll talk to Claire and Kelly and James at Hays then about the new events coming up. So keep posted for those, and we'll let you know what's to come for events in the future. I'll pass on to Claire. There we go. Brian's answered my question for me. Tax claim through HMRC. So thanks, yes. Brian, for answering my question. But over to you, Claire. That's me done.
Okay, thank you very, very much for everybody for attending. I think I need to thank a couple of people as well. Kelly West at the Wakefield office, James Hardcastle at the Huddersfield office, and Vicky Stevens in Leeds have been really, really supportive in terms of putting this together. I've got to say I want to thank everybody that's on the call as well, because I do think it's a really challenging market at the moment. It's a really good, busy, vibrant, opportunistic market, but it's challenging from a talent perspective. And actually, I think sometimes by sharing what people are doing and what people are trying to do in order to make the most of these opportunities actually helps. And there is opportunities for us to pull together some industry specific roundtables and some bigger conversations. If anybody would like to get in touch, so please do so. I will share the slides and the salary guide link, etc. And we'll just get Kira to do the attendance list, and we'll have that with you as soon as possible. But thank you very much for attending, and I hope that we can work together in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.